You're listening to the When Life Hands You Lemons podcast.
But in an entry-level film production, it's one strike and you're out. You're fired. I'm not calling you back.
If your goal today is to make a basket, we're going to make that basket.
The minute you create something, as soon as it's made tangible, you have a copyright in it.
How do I get our guys to sound that big, that full when they do the harmonies?
And I'm your host, Lennon Seahawk. Let's get to the show. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of When Life Hands You Lemons. I am so excited to share this week's episode with you because it features Janet Jackson's attorney, Kamal Moo. Now, he is a graduate of the University of Southern California and Southwestern Law School. He was born in Kingston, Jamaica, and raised in Miami, Florida. I do miss Florida. He currently resides in Southern California with his wife and daughter. Throughout his career, he has represented musicians from various genres of music as both personal manager and attorney. He has negotiated small indie deals and multi-million-dollar agreements and everything in between. His clients include recording artists, producers, record labels, music publishers, and other figures in the entertainment industry. He is a frequent lecturer on the music industry, and he also taught music publishing at Southwestern Law School. And he's also the author of The Straightforward Guide to the Music Biz. Now, Kamal and I talk about a wide range of topics. Now, entertainment law, copyright law, all that stuff, it cannot be contained in one simple episode. There could be a whole podcast just on that topic alone. But we dig into the very kind of bare essentials of what it means to be an entertainment attorney and how important it is for musicians and artists and creatives to understand these basics. So we talk about kind of the basics of a contract, how to negotiate one. We talk about kind of the ins and outs of copyright law, the different types of copyrights, the sound recording and the musical composition. We talk about some news that is coming out and some things to kind of look out for. And we also talk about the AB5 law that was passed here in California last year and went into effect this year, and a whole wide range of other topics as well. So before I dive in and we get talking to Mr. Kamal, I want to remind you to please sign up to my email list, which you can find on my website, which is lennonseahawk.com. Sign up for that, and I can notify you when new episodes like this are live. I would also appreciate it if you would follow me on Instagram. It's just Lennon Seahawk. I would also appreciate a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts, as it greatly helps the show get boosted in the algorithms. And lastly, if you or somebody you know would be a good guest for the show, please fill out the guest request form in the show notes, and I will reach out. So without further ado, let's dive in to my conversation with Janet Jackson's attorney, Kamal Moo. Thanks for being on the show. Appreciate you taking the time. I've actually only had one other entertainment lawyer on the show, and that was like when the show first started. I've been wanting to get some more on, so this is exciting. Cool. Law is always, it's super intricate, and I've always had an interest in it. I'm still debating if I want to go to law school eventually. So it's always interesting to chat with lawyers and all that stuff. So thanks for being on the show. Appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule.
No problem. Yeah, no, I love, law is definitely very interesting. It's very intellectually challenging, which I really enjoyed it for that aspect, but it's really hard, of course. So, anything else. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. Give us some background about who you are and how you kind of got into law.
So I grew up in Miami. I wanted to be a record producer, and that didn't really pan out. I just didn't have the talent for it, honestly. So I wanted to be in the music business, on the business side, legal side. So I came to California, went to USC for undergrad. I was a music industry major. And then I went to Southwestern Law School, also here in LA. They have a really good entertainment program. And I graduated, passed the bar in 2006. And then in 2007, my brother's band just took off. They got really big on MySpace, back when MySpace was around still. And they were getting like 50,000 plays per day. They were like a screamo rock band, and they did a cover of a hip hop song that just really took off. And they got record label offers, and they needed a manager. And so I jumped in and said, "Hey, I'll manage you." And it kind of worked out. It's a 2-man band, so it was my brother and another guy. And I managed them for a few years. I picked up a few other clients. And then in 2010, my brother's band broke up, and I just kind of got burnt out on managing. And then I started my law practice in 2010. So since then, I've been practicing law mainly. I've kind of managed here and there, but not as much. And 2013, I started my solo practice because my ex-partner, he just left law altogether. He actually works in marketing now. And so yeah, it's just been really interesting. I represent a lot of independent clients, some bigger clients, and I've worked on huge deals, small deals, everything in between. So I have a lot of experience. Plus, being a manager, I learned a lot of the rubber meets the road kind of stuff. Like I was out there on tour with them. I sold merch after the shows. I drove the tour van through blizzards in Wyoming. Like I know how it is. I know how it is to be out there on tour. It's tough. So I think that really helps inform my contract drafting and what's practical, what's not practical, and from that aspect. So I have a really interesting kind of unique background as compared to most attorneys, I think.
I think too with a lot of it is you have that experience, whereas a lot of attorneys don't have the experience. They just have a passion, like they're a musician and they just do gigging around the area, whereas you did the full-on managing. And it's not unheard of for attorneys to be managers as well. Like a lot of attorneys will ship out records to get publishing deals and record label deals and stuff like that. And I was reading on your website that that's not something you do. But how did kind of the manifestation and bringing everything together from being the manager and like working in law actually help with managing your brother? Like, wasn't that a lot to kind of take in at the time?
Well, it's interesting because when I'd only been a lawyer for about a year. And, when you get out of law school, you don't really know everything. I mean, the theory, you learn cases, you learn interpretation, you learn stuff like that. But a lot of the rubber meets the road stuff, you just need to learn on the job. I never worked at a law firm. I kind of got thrown in. I sort of learned the music industry from being a manager from that side. So it was useful to have the legal training because it helped a lot in terms of looking at things, but in terms of the practical aspect of it, just the relationship aspect, the just that clause, on paper looks good, but in reality that doesn't make any sense. So there's a practical aspect, and so I kind of had a crash course in it, just picking them up as a client. And they had a lawyer too, who actually did the deal for them, so I learned a lot from her, kind of working with her. And plus I had other clients who did deals too, and I kind of learn from their lawyers as well. So I had a really unconventional path in that sense. So it was useful. And then I sort of filled out my training on the practical side, being a manager, which most lawyers, like I said, they'd work for a firm or they'd work for a music company, but I just kind of went another route.
So are there any new entertainment laws kind of coming out, music laws, or I know like the Music Modernization passed what, 3 years ago. And then in California, we had the AB5 law that musicians just got an exemption from. So can you talk a little bit about maybe some of the laws that are going on? Any music industry news that artists and musicians should kind of pay attention to?
Sorry, I think I might have lost you there for a second. I think, my logic stopped for some reason. So sorry about that. Okay. Sorry. No, I think that a lot of it is, with the AB5 law, I know they passed an exception to the law that basically said musicians are exempt, recording artists are exempt. So, that kind of helped there tremendously because most producers, musicians, they're independent contractors. They're not really employees. So that definitely was a big change. And I think also with, like you said, the Music Modernization Act, there's a new thing called the collective that's going to collect and distribute mechanical royalties that it actually launches next year. So no one really knows how it's going to go, but it's a good idea in theory, I think. So I think that it's going to be that's going to help sort of streamline the industry, I think, but it's just, it's all in the execution. So who knows how that's going to go, from a practical standpoint.
Mm-hmm. And can you explain a little bit about what the AB5 law was from kind of an attorney's perspective?
So California passed a law that said tried to get rid of basically the gig economy. So Lyft drivers, Uber drivers, independent contractors versus employees, because if you're an employee, then you're entitled to certain legal protections, rest periods, workers' comp, other benefits. Whereas, and of course, they'll withhold your taxes and they'll pay you as a W-2 employee. As an independent contractor, you don't really have all those requirements. So that's why a lot of people, unfortunately, will incorrectly classify people as independent contractors when they're really employees. So this law tried to basically define it so that everybody, most people wouldn't be independent contractors anymore. Musicians kind of obviously got upset about that because most record producers, they don't go work for a record label like an employee. They do one track and that's it, and they kind of do it their own studio. There's a lot of different factors to consider. So when they passed the exemption to that for recording artists, that kind of freed up the industry a little bit more, kind of put it back to the way it was, because then it would have gotten really complicated in terms of how you paid people, withholding taxes. You'd have to have all kinds of agencies or employment agencies pop up to try and do that. So I think it sort of saved the industry a lot of headache in that sense. But I know that definitely a lot of musicians, because most musicians don't want to, they just want to play. They don't want to worry about like, oh, they're going to not hire me because they have to pay me as an employee and so forth.
Right. And a lot of it was, when you're a musician, you're going to play at a certain bar or a venue, and technically you're an employee of the venue, and then the people who are paying in your band are employees of you. So you're an employer and an employee in the same night. And I can see how that can get quite complicated and quite messy.
Right. Of course.
So are you a musician yourself?
I wanted to be a record producer, so I learned keyboard when I was a kid and scales and all that stuff. And even now, I still mess around. I have Logic, so I'll play around and do some remixes here and there for fun. My brother is actually the musically talented one in the family, because that's why he got signed to the label, because his band, he wrote all the music for the band. So I have a little bit of it, but honestly, my strength is in writing and language. That's why I went to law school, and that's why I'm doing what I'm doing now. So but I still enjoy it. I like and I like to draw too. I do a lot of drawing, and other, just music is not really a thing that works for me as well.
Sure. So what kind of music do you typically listen to, or are you interested in? I know you said your brother was in a rock band?
Yeah, they were like a screaming rock band. I have a really wide variety of stuff I listen to. I like a lot of pop music and urban music and jazz and reggae. I grew up on a lot of reggae music because my family's from Jamaica. I was born in Jamaica. But yeah, my brother's band, I love their music. I love rock music too. So I have a really wide variety of tastes. I think just something that grabs me and wants me, it just, if it's good, it's good, right?
Yeah, sure. When did you move from Jamaica?
Oh, so I moved to Miami when I was 3.
Okay.
So I was really young. That's why
Really
I have
young.
no accent. And then I grew up in Miami and then came out to LA for college and ended up staying.
Okay. And how long have you been out here?
Let's see, 98, so like 22 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I moved out here when I was 18. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So I just turned 40 this year. So yeah.
Oh, wow. Wow. That's a long time.
Yep.
Congrats.
Thanks. Yeah. Long road.
Yeah. So you've always been a writer, and that's kind of like your thing. And then your brother, you kind of delegate the music to your brother. So is your family creative as well? Or do you like your parents and stuff?
My dad is a writer too. He writes poetry and stuff like that. Generally speaking though, I think I have a cousin who's an actor, he did voice acting and stuff, but we were the ones who really tried to push to do our own thing, like in the entertainment business in general. I think we really took the big leap. No one else really does that in our family.
So when you're working with different clients, you have a wide array of them, I would assume, like from different genres and stuff. Do contracts and things kind of change based on the genre, or how does that kind of work, like working with a pop star versus a rock star versus a rapper versus a very niche like classical Indian music?
Mm-hmm. Totally. It really does matter because so nowadays labels will offer 360 deals,
Sure.
So basically that just basically means that the label, in addition to paying you record royalties, they're going to take a piece of your other income. So merchandise, touring, other entertainment income. So for example, if you're, let's say, a rock bands tend to do really well from touring. My brother's band did really well touring. So maybe they'll take a little bit less on the, want the label to take less on the royalty side, but give a little bit more on the touring side. Likewise, if you're an electronic musician who doesn't really tour much, but a lot of your music comes from licensing to movies and TV shows and stuff, then yeah, touring isn't really going to be much of a source for you. So maybe, you're going to, want to give more and then be at higher record royalties because, you get more on the licensing side. So it really depends on who you are, what kind of band you are, how you make your money, and then kind of trying to craft the deal from that aspect. So my main client is actually Janet Jackson. So I do all of her contracts, and, she's a superstar. And of course her deal is very different from, the starting out band, but she's been around for so long. She's like a brand unto herself. So, everything's kind of different. That's why I said, like, I worked on very small deals all the way up to big stars like that. And it all depends on the situation and kind of who they are, where they are in their career, and, what like where they make their money from. And then you look at that and make the deal work based on that.
And does it get more complex the bigger they get? Like Janet Jackson obviously has a lot going on, and there's a lot more things you need to keep an eye out for versus somebody who's maybe just starting. So talk about like kind of the differences between like a superstar artist versus somebody that's just kind of starting out.
So with Janet, I mean, she has a built-in audience. I mean, when she goes on tour, for example, she was actually supposed to tour this year, but then COVID hit, and then, tour had to get canceled. So, she can reliably, say, well, I'm going to do really well on tours because people know who she is. When you're a younger band or a newer act, I mean, you have to really build that following. So of course, maybe your numbers aren't so great on the touring side, and you just have to but you have to gut it out and just start to build your fan base in person, one show at a time. So there's different considerations also too. When Janet tours, I mean, she puts on a big show because she's at that level. There's a lot of dancers, a lot of personnel. So of course, you have to think about that. Of course, that's figured into the contract. Whereas, in the beginning, it's just going to be, if you're a small baby band, as they call them, you're going to be like touring in a van with a trailer, hauling your stuff around from gig to gig. So it really depends. And you have to really think that, you just have to look at where you are and just kind of base it on that. So there's different considerations at every level.
This Janet Jackson, she must be popular. I'll have to look her up.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, definitely.
She must be good if she's got a built-in audience. I'll have to check her out.
Check her out.
Yeah. So what are some things when like an artist is looking out for an attorney? And I know when musicians, you get in the studio or you're working on your computer and you just have these ideas, the first thing you do is like, you don't want to worry about the business stuff. You don't want to deal with any of the paperwork. You just want to create the music and then release it. Right. But there's a lot of legal stuff that needs to happen, like copyrights and all that stuff. So talk about kind of some of the basics that you should take into consideration when you're starting a career in music before you release a song, when you're uploading it. And then, maybe first, let's talk about what should you look for in an attorney when you're looking for one. Like, obviously, having Janet Jackson as a client is a big plus, but it's not necessarily a make or break deal. What are some things that somebody should look for in an attorney when they're looking for one?
I always say that I swear half my job is explaining the law to my clients. You want an attorney who's going to be able to explain everything to you in plain English. I feel like I've had clients come to me who say that, oh, my last attorney made me feel like an idiot. They talk down to me, and I'm like, I'll never do that to you. I'll always explain everything in plain English in a way that's going to make sense to you. And, having come from management too, I understand how to talk to creative people.
Sure.
And I can, any concept can be made simple. It's not rocket science. It's not nuclear physics. It's really like, it definitely gets a little complicated here and there, but I feel like the mark of a good teacher is someone who can make things simple. And I feel like, if you have the right attorney, they'll be able to teach you the things you need to know. And, I think for me too, I've definitely been in situations where I've had clients who they want to go through every single line of the contract on the phone, and I'll be on their phone for 2 hours with them. And that's fine. I don't mind doing that because if they have the curiosity, I'm willing to walk them through it because it's their livelihood. So I think, finding a good attorney who has that kind of patience, who's willing to explain things to you and make sure that you feel comfortable and understand, the thing is sometimes, most deals aren't great. I mean, they're heavily in favor of the label, which is normal, but as a lawyer, you just want them to understand what they're getting into. I mean, you try and make it as good as you can, but you understand, look, you're a newer artist, so you're not going to be able to get certain things. So you have to sort of walk them through that. But, I don't want, I never want any client to come back to me and say, I didn't know this was in there, or you didn't tell me this. And it's like, well, I don't want that to happen to me. So That's the main thing. I think someone who's going to be able to be that give you that guidance.
So something I've always wondered is why are contracts so diverse and confusing? Like, why do they have to put it so confusingly where just the average person can't just read it, interpret it, and be like, oh, I know what that means?
Right. I mean, it's interesting because the music industry has developed over the course of several decades.
Right.
It's one of those things that it's not intuitive. There's a lot of really esoteric things that you have to really live in the music industry for a while to really understand it. So I get the fact that, like, as a musician, your craft, you know how to play guitar, you know how to play, but then this is a whole other business aspect that you just have no idea about. And you're thrown into it and like, this doesn't make any sense. I had a friend who he was a Grammy Award winning songwriter, and he had no idea where his money was coming from for publishing. So I got in there and I just sat down with him one day and explained music publishing. I'm like, these are mechanical royalties, these are public performance royalties, and so forth. And he just didn't know. And I think that it's a very specific industry, and that's why the contracts are kind of sophisticated, in the way they are. The big labels will have 50-page contracts. Indie labels, sometimes I've seen 2-page deal memos. The contracts I draft, I represent some record labels, some small indie labels, and my contracts usually run like 10 to 15 pages. I tend to write them in a way that I think that a normal person could pick it up and read it. I try and make it as straightforward as possible, because the best contracts I've seen are the ones that are just plain English. Now, of course, there's some terms that are sort of have a specific meaning that, like, you can't really get around, but you do the best you can. So I think that, like, it doesn't have to be super complicated. I think some attorneys just kind of draft them that way. And unfortunately, there's some kind of predatory labels out there that purposely make things hard for the band to understand and, don't want them to be able to pick it up and read it, unfortunately. So that there's a few different things there, different forces at work there.
So what happens if you get a contract and say somebody signs it and then you get to court and you end up like suing and the label is full of like jargon and it's hard to comprehend and understand? Like, what happens in that respect?
Well, first of all, I don't do litigation, so I just do strictly transactional work. So I just negotiate the contract and have the client, sign it. And if it goes to litigation, I just refer that to somebody else. One way that really helps to prevent that from happening is every single client I have, I tell them the same thing. I say, look, ultimately the contract says what it says, but how do you feel about them? What are the quality of people you're dealing with on the other side? Right. Because I had a client who was a very talented singer. She was signing with a independent record label. The deal looked great. The numbers were great. I did the deal, I was really happy with it. She signed it. Nothing happened for 2 years. They just put her on the shelf. And that's why I say, like, if the label is fair-minded, if they have a good reputation, then, you can, that's what you really need to look at. I mean, yes, of course, what's in the contract is very important and you need to pay attention to those numbers. But a lot of it is, they can promise you a pie in the sky, but then, ultimately, if you sign and they do nothing for you, then it's worthless. The deal is kind of worthless then. So that's what I kind of tell people. You have to really do your research and see, and also the level of enthusiasm. If they're willing to commit real money to your recordings, to promoting your recordings, then that means something. Because then if they're willing to put that in the contract, that means that they have a certain level of confidence in you. So that's sort of how I try and help avoid that from happening in the first place.
So do you have like kind of a template that you use that you kind of just copy and paste specific clauses from that you want in each contract, or do you draft each contract from scratch, starting from zero?
Oh, I definitely have templates. I mean, I've developed templates over the years from just working with different labels. But of course, every contract's a little bit different because, for example, let's say this label wants to offer 1 album plus 2 options and versus 1 album plus 3 options. And then you have to say, what are the advances? What's the royalty rate? What's the, so there's different things that definitely have to change throughout. But yeah, definitely. I mean, I use templates, and I think most lawyers do. Honestly, I don't know anybody who drafts anything from scratch, because that would just be that would take forever.
Right, writing a 15-page contract every single day that's a lot of words.
Right.
So, what's your favorite part about the whole process? Is it drafting the contract? Is it working with the clients? Is it Is it negotiating? Is it kind of breaking things down? Like, what's your favorite part of the process?
I love helping to build businesses, and an artist is a business, so like whether it's
Absolutely.
someone who comes to me and says, hey, I want to start my own label, or hey, I just, I got this record coming out, it's doing really well. I love to help people build. And that's the exciting part. It's the manager in me, like that's a
Mhm.
holdover. I really just like that part of it, building something from the ground up. And it's a lot of fun. And I don't know, just my grandfather was an entrepreneur, and I totally got that from him. So I try and do the same thing too. So I enjoy, and even myself, I have a lot of other business interests, that I have. I
Sure.
wrote and produced a film a couple years ago, and
Amazing.
and I wrote this book that that Mike sent you and stuff. So I have a
Sure.
lot of different things I like to work on.
Absolutely. So what advice do you have to people who uh, they have a budget, they have X amount of dollars, and they want to invest in their project. But obviously, as a musician, you're going to want to invest in the production, the mixing, the mastering, the songwriting, the studio time, all the creative stuff to actually get your craft done. But you don't set aside the money for the business stuff, the promotion, the marketing, the contracts, things like that. So they say, oh, I'm just going to use one of those legal sites like LegalZoom or
Right.
things like that. What advice do you have to people that just delegate to like the simpler, like quick and finish, quick and dirty type thing versus contacting, an attorney like yourself who really can draft and understand everything?
Right. I mean, I think that I've seen this situation so many times. People will come to me with a contract they found on the internet, or they just signed whatever was put in front of them. And, first of all, when you grab something on the internet, it doesn't really necessarily always fit your situation properly.
Right.
So you have to be careful about that. And then also just don't sign whatever's put in front of you, because usually that's not a great contract. That's why there's negotiations. So, definitely spend the money to get a good attorney. I'm not like, I understand. I work with a lot of independent artists. I understand money's tight. So I'll always try
Yeah.
and work with them. And, because obviously I have my, business to run, but at the same time, I want to help, and I want to try and give them rates that are fair and they can afford at the moment, and build a relationship. Because the idea is, when I'm working on this small deal for them now, I want to be there when they're signing the multi-million-dollar deal.
Right.
So to me, it's about the long game. So definitely I'd say spend the money. It's totally worth it. I have so many stories of clients who didn't spend the money up front and they got stuck in terrible deals. Or I had one client who was a perfect example. He is a record producer. He had this artist who was she was under 18, so she was a minor. He produced a song for her. He had her sign a contract. He wrote the contract himself. He's not a lawyer. Contract made no sense. And then the song went on to make a ton of money, lots of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars. But then he didn't get any of it, because then she went and got a lawyer. She was a minor at the time. She couldn't sign a contract. The contract made no sense. And he got left out in the cold. And I said, had you come to me, spent a little bit of money, I could have helped you avoid some of this, and that's always the tricky part. I hate to see that happen, because it doesn't need to happen. So, when you're doing your budget, just leave a little bit of money aside for proper legal representation. And I understand too, everyone thinks entertainment lawyers cost an arm and a leg, and some of them do. And definitely, if I'm working on a big deal, I'll definitely charge, some good rates. But at the same time, I get it. I get it. I get that there's, I know what it's like to be an indie musician. So, it never hurts to do some research and talk to a few lawyers.
So what happened in that situation? Just because he had her sign a contract and she was underage and was a minor, the contract isn't valid, correct?
She could disaffirm the contract, and then also, she wrote the song, but he produced it, and then it just got really complicated. And then they, and like I said, he wrote the contract, and I tried to read it. It made no sense whatsoever. So it was a hard situation. It was a hard lesson for him to learn. But he missed out on a ton of money because of it, unfortunately. So
he'll probably never make that mistake again.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. So he learned from that. And, so I think that's the hard part. I think you just have to, people also too, I mean, just like you spend a lot of money producing an album, but not enough money to market it. And
Right.
If you don't properly market an album, you might have the greatest album in the world, but if no one hears it, then what's the point?
Mm-hmm.
So,
you could be the next Janet Jackson and nobody knows.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. You just need proper marketing, and, you have to think of yourself. You have to think of it in the right way. It's like with me, I wrote this book, but I spent the money to hire a PR guy, because it's like, that's what you have to do. I mean, if it sits on my shelf, what good is it going to do anybody there?
Right. And not only that, like you were talking about earlier, is the creatives know how to do the creative stuff. You know how to do the writing. Whereas like, you know all the legal stuff, but you don't know how to do the press and the publishing and all that stuff. So you hire a PR agent. They know, they have all the contacts. They know how to, take, you can just kind of delegate that to somebody who knows what they're doing. And that's satisfying. And when you can find somebody that you trust and are, can put your faith in, that it means a lot. And, you can set yourself up for big success if you find the right person.
Right.
So yeah, I actually, when the first attorney that I had on the show, she was telling me she's had contracts where people have downloaded them from the internet. They had signed them between, I don't know if it was a band or the record label or whatever. And they give the contract to her and she's reading. It's like a 2 or 3 page contract. And she's like, well, who's from Finland? Nobody. Well, who's from Denmark? Nobody. I mean, this contract was written for somebody in Denmark, so there's no jurisdiction even in the contract. So it's like,
wow.
it didn't make any sense, but it's like, you can't be just signing things willy nilly. And she's had a whole bunch of stories that were kind of interesting of all these things that people try to take shortcuts. And it's just like, it's one of those things that you just don't want to take shortcuts on. So going forward, setting yourself up for success, that's a whole episode in and of itself, but I want to break it down into kind of a brief nutshell. Talk about some of the things that an artist should do to kind of set themselves up, whether they're registering for their business, they're getting their copyrights registered, they're getting their publishing, all that stuff kind of set up. What are some of the things, like kind of the checklist types of things that an artist should do to get themselves set up for when that track does go viral or explode and they get hundreds of thousands of dollars, that they're ready to go?
Right. And I think this, honestly, 100%, I think that the main thing is education, understanding, what needs to be protected. Because I think that, for example, in the music business, you can really own music in 2 ways. There's the musical composition and then the sound recording. Mm-hmm. A lot of people don't know that. A lot of musicians don't know that. But you have to understand too, like, as a songwriter, you're making compositions. As a recording artist, you're making sound recordings. And you have to understand how you're making money from each one of those things and how to protect them. You copyright them, but also how you make money and what's a public performance royalty, what's a mechanical royalty. And I think, like I said, you don't have to become an expert in it, but you have to understand too where your money's coming from. I like to say too, it's like if you get into any industry, let's say you have some talent and stuff, let's say you're great at football, you should make an effort to try and learn how that whole industry works. Like, where does my money come from? Like licensing deals, all that kind of stuff. And then hopefully, your agent will walk you through that. It's just about education. And I think that that's the first step, is educating yourself, listening to podcasts like this and, reading books and just really educating yourself. The next step is just, understand that, like, whenever you collaborate with anybody on your music or you license your music, have a written contract. That's really important, because a lot of people will just start working and that's fine. But, at some point somebody has to sign a contract, because the worst thing you can do is, have, like, let's say 5 people work together on a recording, put it out there, it becomes a big hit. Then you have to reverse engineer those contracts. And I always say it's like trying to unscramble an egg. It's just not possible at that point, because there's money and there's jealousy and there's all these different things that come into play.
So verbal agreements and handshakes are no good?
You shouldn't. I mean, now, unfortunately, that still happens. But to the extent possible, I try and advise my clients, no, please get a contract in place. At least before you put the track out, get a contract in place. And then, like you said, they don't want to spend money, but it's worth it. I mean, if you're going to be serious about your art as a business, you should protect it. So that's the next step, is really think about that, protecting yourself with contracts, copyright, and just, the people you do business with. Those things will really set you up for success.
Even if you're best friends with that person, because friendships get ruined when contracts are not set up. And when money starts getting involved, things get kind of messy.
Oh yeah. Big time.
I'm sure. So what else can they do? Education is number one, learning some of the business. What are the next steps? Like, let's say I've got my business registered, I've got my contracts in place. What's next?
Well, you need a good team. I think that, besides your attorney, you're going to need a good manager. Now, the thing is, people ask me, how can I get a manager? And I said, well, realistically, you're going to get a manager when you need one. Right. That is, you have something going on in your career that you can build on. So, for example, my brother's band, when they were getting 50,000 plays a day on MySpace, they had some heat, they had something going on. They needed a manager to help sort of focus that and help field offers and talk to record labels. And that's where I came in. So you need some kind of spark, I think. So, once you get to that point, then you need a good manager to help capitalize, because then they can introduce you to other people, like other, potential collaborators, producers, songwriters, record labels, whatever, DJs. And that's what it's about. So you need, and it's hard to find that, find a good manager, because they're called personal managers because it's such a personal relationship. That's why it kind of worked out with my brother's band, because he was my brother and I, knew him really well, obviously. Right. So that was good. It was natural trust there. So I think that's one thing. And of course, if when you get to the point where you can tour, you need a good booking agent. So a good booking agent's going to be able to get you on the right tours, get you some good guarantees, get paid for your, live performances. So, your team is definitely vitally important. Like I said, in addition to, music attorney to help watch your back, those are some of the components that you definitely need once you get to that level.
Cool. So now the money's starting to come in. What are the avenues where the money's coming in? Can you kind of explain some of those avenues and what they are?
Sure. Yeah. So, if you're a songwriter, and so if you write your own music, you're going to get different. That's there are many different ways to make money with a composition. So let's say,
sure.
And I'll give you an example. So let's say I write a song called "Life Hands You Lemons," and we put it out. And so let's say it gets downloaded on iTunes. I get paid 9.1 cents for every record that's sold that way. As the songwriter, that's called a mechanical royalty, because you're mechanically reproducing my composition on this recording and selling it. So for every copy, you get 9.1 cents. So if you sell, like a lot of records, then you get 9.1 cents for each one, then that could add up. Also, to whenever my song is played on the radio, I get paid a little bit for that too, from what are called PROs, or performing rights organizations, like ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC. Their job is to go out there and collect money from radio airplay and TV airplay, and from venues, and just basically anywhere that plays music publicly, broadcast it. So that's one way to make money: public performance royalties. Also, too, if someone uses my composition in a film or a TV show, they have to pay me what's called a synchronization license fee. And so that's why, and you can set whatever you want for that. That's why you barely see like a Beatles or a Prince song in a movie, because they'll ask for like $1 million. So those are just, those are the three main ways that you're going to make money as a songwriter. Now, of course, there's other ways like sheet music, and those are other things. But out of like hundreds of clients, maybe like 2 have had to deal with sheet music on,
right.
in my experience.
Sure.
But those are the three main ways that you're going to make your money as a songwriter. Then as a recording artist, when you sign with a record label, you're going to get paid, an advance usually, which is some money up front, which is recoupable, meaning they're going to take it back from your royalties. So let's say you get $100,000 up front. Well, they're going to have to get that money back from your share of the royalties before you start to see any royalties. So let's say you get like, I don't want to get too complicated, but let's say, you get 20% record royalty rate. So let's say the record sale price is $10, you can get $2, but there's all kind of deductions in there. But so basically, you're going to get money from that way, from touring as well as a musician. If you're a live musician and you have a good live tour, then you can get money from guarantees, which is basically a promoter will pay you a flat fee amount of money to come and play at their venue. So there's that. There's merchandise. Let's say my brother's band made a ton of money from merchandise. They had shirts with their names on it. I set my friends on fire and made a ton of money from that. And there's endorsement deals. Let's say, Rihanna makes way more money now from like makeup and fashion than she does from music. Sure. So of course you can get into that as well. So there's all these different avenues, but you have to get creative. I think, especially with the internet, it's opened up a lot of doors for people, because now it's like, I feel like, you can, as long as you can sort of establish a presence. I mean, there's many different ways for you to make music now, money from your music now. Like, it's not just record sales like it used to be.
So going back just a little bit, as a songwriter, that's the publishing world and songwriting royalties get so confusing to me.
Oh yeah.
I understand them like on a basic level. So is the 9.1 cents, how is that calculated? That's set by Congress, correct?
So yeah, by the is that what's called the Copyright Royalty Board, and there's these judges, and they're appointed by the Librarian of Congress, and then they set them. Now it's been at 9.1 cents for several years. I don't know when it's going to be raised, but that's what it is. Now that's called a mechanical royalty because, like I said, you're reproducing mechanically the song. But when a song is played on Spotify, you get a mechanical royalty too as a songwriter. It's just way smaller because no one's downloading a permanent copy or buying a CD. They're streaming it. And so it's like 0.0061 cents
It's
per
like
stream.
0.003 or yeah, it's
Yeah.
very small.
Yeah, and so you have to have a lot of streams for that to add up to mechanical royalties. So it's definitely, you're dealing with like fractions of a penny or pennies, at a time. So it's definitely. But if you have like a hit song, it can really add up, of course. So if you've had something that's been streamed 1 billion times, or you've had a track that's been oh, okay. Sorry, I thought it froze for a second.
Yeah, you did freeze for a second there.
Sorry, I might stop the logic. Actually, I don't know if that might be doing it. That's okay. Sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. If it's causing issues.
Yeah, I think it might be kind of causing my computer. I got quite a bit though. Okay, sorry about that.
And you were saying like if you have a song that gets to like 1 billion streams.
Right. So if you have a song that gets like 1 billion streams, I mean, that's going to add up, of course. And of course, if your song is on the radio every 5 minutes, like some songs are, you're going to get a nice share of that public performance income. If you get a song that placed in like a big movie too, I mean, that can be a good licensing fee. So, definitely like, but it's definitely, it's not like, obviously the amount of the volume of music coming out nowadays. I mean, you have to have really strong music or something that really connects in a big way. Cause there's so much more, there's so much noise out there now. There's so many more options for everybody to put out their music as opposed to before.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And streaming has really thrown a monkey wrench in the whole thing because copyright law is very kind of outdated. And I'm hoping it gets updated sometime soon because it's not really fair to current musicians in its current state. So what are some of the common myths that you hear clients talk about in copyright? Like one of them I hear quite often is like you can use somebody's sample for a certain amount of seconds. If it's under 3 seconds and it's, I can use it. Or if I mail myself a copy of the song, then it's copyrighted. I've heard that a few times. What are some of the other kind of myths that you hear that you can kind of debunk?
Well, with, for example, mailing it to yourself, I mean, that doesn't really do anything because really, under the law, you have a copyright in a work the moment you create it. Yeah. It's just that if you want to sue someone for it because of copyright infringement, you need to prove that you own it. And the only way to do that is really, the best way to do that really is by registering it for copyright. So registration with the Copyright Office is kind of a prerequisite to being able to bring a lawsuit. Mm-hmm. So that's the way I say, like, just, spend the money to copyright your new album before you put it out.
And how much is that to do that?
I believe the current rate's like $55 for the album itself.
So is there a limit on the album, like 10 songs, 12 songs?
I think as long as it's a collective work, I believe. I mean, don't quote me on this. I haven't looked at I think they changed the regulations recently. I don't do a lot of copyright law, but I know that like that's $55 and it's like, as long as it's a complete album. So you can't put like 200 songs in there and call it an album,
Right.
But like, as long as it gets a reasonable number, you can put it in there. And then you copyright the sound recording. And then if you have different writers on each composition, you probably have to, register them separately because, like, let's say you have 3 writers on this song and 4 writers on this composition, you can't just put those into one registration and you have to do that individually. So that kind of adds up a little bit.
And when you register each one, is that registering the copyright for the sound recording and the composition, or is it just doing one?
It depends. So, for example, let's say you wrote all the compositions and you are the only one who owns the sound recording. You can file all of that at once. But if it's different owners for each thing, then you have to break it up. Got
it. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So what are some other kind of copyright myths that you hear?
Those are the 2 biggest ones, actually. In terms of what was the first one you said? Not the
using a sample.
Using a sample. That's right. I'm always paranoid about liability. So I always say, if you're going to use anybody's work for anything, get permission, unless you're doing maybe a parody. And there's the fair use defense. But the thing is, as they say in law school, fair use is a shield and not a sword. So like you can try and claim it as a defense, but you're going to have to go through the litigation process and it just gets messy. So I always say, look, just if you're going to use anybody's work in your own work, just, get permission. It'll save you a lot of headache in the long run. Now, that doesn't really mean that it happened, even at the highest levels. I remember like 10 years ago, Drake put out a song with a sample that was owned by Playboy, had a jazz record label a long time ago. He took a sample from that and never got it cleared. And then I think they got like a $2 million judgment against him or something like that. But I mean, that's just what it is. It's like, but maybe it was worth it for him because it blew up his career. So, but it's definitely worth it to get sample clearance. Now, I definitely will help with sample clearance, but I have a consultant who I work with who that's mainly what she does, sample clearance and administration and doing those kind of things. So if you have a track with a sample in it before you put it out, it's worth it to see what your options are there.
So that was one thing too, was Lil Nas X, when his song Old Town Road blew up, apparently it had a sample of Nine Inch Nails song in it.
Yeah.
And that went to court as well. And it's interesting to see the types of things that people are trying to claim as copyright, like the whole Marvin Gaye and Robin Thicke?
I disagree with that one, because I thought they got it wrong in that one. And I think that's going to go to the Supreme Court because when you copyright a composition, you can only protect realistically the lyrics and the melody. Those two songs had neither in common, but they felt the same. So to me, it's like that's beyond what copyright law can protect. You can't protect a feel, then all reggae songs would infringe on every other reggae song, right?
Right.
So I kind of really disagreed. I mean, you could tell it was inspired by it because it had a lot of similar instrumentation and everything like that. But like, I think that as for the protectable elements, I don't think that was the right call personally. We'll see. I don't know. I think it just opened up a whole can of worms that you have to be, now it's like you might get sued for something that's like this sounds, I mean, there's only 12 notes in the Western scale. I mean, like there's only so many combinations out there of things. So, I think that'll kind of open up a lot of problems in the long run. So I don't know, hopefully it gets corrected at some point, I would hope.
Yeah, same thing with the Ice Ice Baby by Vanilla Ice and Queen's Under Pressure. Mm-hmm. Same thing, like the bass line was the same.
I think he sampled the recording, didn't he? I mean, because
I think so. I'd have to look back on that.
Because that's the issue, because like it's different to replay something. So let's say I take a guitar riff and I replay it. Then I just have to get permission from the owner of the composition because I didn't use the original sound recording.
Got it.
But in his case, I believe, don't quote me on this, I believe he took the actual recording, which is like, that's a slam dunk on both sides. Well, I prove, you took the recording, which embodied the composition. So you infringed on both.
Oh, so if you use the sound recording, you have to get copyright, or you have to get permission from the sound recording owner and the composition because the composition is in the sound recording.
It's underlying. Yeah.
Ah, interesting. But if you replay it, then you only have to do composition because you're not using the actual sound recording.
Yep.
Interesting. I didn't know that. Interesting. Yep. So what I hear a lot of jumbo talked about for the fair use, and there's a lot of YouTubers that I watch where they're doing parody videos of very big, like Ariana Grande songs.
Right.
How does that work? Like, what exactly is the fair use? Like, what does it mean? Like, I feel a lot of people just throw it around and like, oh, that's fair use. That's fair use. That's fair use. I can use it. It's fair use.
Right. And so it's really it's an analysis that a court would run to see. It's like, well, are you taking enough of the copyrightable elements to infringe on this person's rights? So a lot of it is like the commercial aspect of it. So for example, fair use is like, let's say you have a movie review site and you take clips from the movie to show as part of your review. That's considered, usually fair use because it's like you're using it to comment on it. On the work itself. You're not like showing the whole movie, you're just commenting on aspects of it. Whereas, I think that, or educational purposes, like if you're teaching somebody something and you show clips of play clips of a song, that's fair use because you're using it for educational purposes. But I think it's more like, you can't take something and say, oh, I'm going to take this riff and stick it in my sound recording, then I put it out and try and make a bunch of money with it. I mean, the courts don't really that looks like infringement, So that's why, like I said, fair use is a shield and not a sword. You can't use it to, you can't use it to affirmatively say, yes, I can take that, because you're gonna have to defend that lawsuit. And maybe, if it passes the test, fair use test, then, you might be okay, but then you have to go through that whole lawsuit just to kind of do that. So,
So when, where's the line drawn? Like, let's say, Like where do like, oh, I was using that for educational purposes. Like, okay, where's the line drawing for educational purposes or parody? Like some people will claim that it was educational, but where's the line for that?
Well, parody is a little bit different because parody is protected by the First Amendment. So like parody is basically you're kind of taking something to poke fun at it, to ridicule it, to comment on it. It's a form of commentary, basically.
Like SNL is basically
SNL, right? Exactly.
parody.
It's parody, satire, political satire. You're taking these, well-known elements and then, kind of warping them in a way to make a commentary. And that's like, that's a form of free speech, basically. That's different than just like, I took your sample and stuck it in my song because it sounded cool, so you're not really commenting on it. So that's kind of the difference there. I mean, you have to really do something with it to sort of change the character of it where it's like its own thing, like you're really commenting on it and making something new.
Got it. That makes sense. Interesting. Yeah, I just hear so many different things about it, and it's like I know it can get kind of murky with quite a few things. So I took some notes before the conversation here. So when somebody's looking for an attorney, or let's say they move to another state, but they have a friend in another state, can you hire attorneys from other states, or like how does that work? Do you recommend hiring an attorney from California if you live in California, and Delaware if you live in Delaware?
Well, the thing is too, I mean, the vast majority of entertainment contracts you're going to run into are from California or New York. That's where the industry is. I mean, if you're in country music, then like Nashville, Tennessee.
Sure.
But like just the vast majority of contracts are going to be based under California law. But I think that in terms of jurisdictional issues, I mean, that's obviously an ethical thing usually, but usually it's not an issue because like, you mainly have to be licensed to go practice in court and like offer legal services in the country. Whereas like, a lot of these contracts are based on copyright laws. So that's a federal thing, like it's more based on federal copyright laws. So it's not like state by state, specific, so it doesn't really, that's not as much of a restriction usually.
Okay. So if there's no shame in hiring an attorney from a different state, if it works.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
Basically.
Interesting. When looking at a contract, what are some things that you're typically looking for? What are some like big red flags? Whether it's a recording contract, a touring contract, whatever it is, an agreement between bandmates, whatever, like what are some kind of the red flags in a contract, and maybe some things that an artist can kind of pick out themselves?
Well, for example, in a recording deal, there's definitely red flags that pop up when, for example, the label is saying, hey, we'll set your recording budget and we'll give you something fair. You're going to want a hard number there whenever possible. Say, okay, we'll spend at least this much money on your recordings. Hard numbers help, like sure. That's one of the main things. Also too, how long are they trying to lock the artist up for? Because, let's say you have one album plus out 6 option albums. This kid's going to be stuck on that label for years and years. As a lawyer, if it's an independent label, usually you want to see like one album with an option for like 1 or 2 more albums. That's kind of more, it's always, if they're trying to lock them in for a long amount of time, it always kind of raises a red flag to me. Of course, what the advance looks like. If it's a really small advance, it's like, well, then this kid's got to be able to get a job somewhere else to pay the bills, right? Like they're not going to be able to live off their advance. So that's an issue as well. Are they trying to do a publishing deal as well in the thing? And a lot of deals nowadays have co-publishing deals built in, which is fine, but it just has to be fair. It has to make sense. Hopefully you get an advance for that as well. So a lot of it is, just case by case, like what's the situation and what's the label? Like I said, does the label have a good reputation? There's some really great independent labels out there that don't have a ton of money, but they're good labels and they're going to treat you well. They're going to be fair with you. So you have to look at who you're dealing with and kind of understand that. But no, there's definitely some things that I see and I'm like, oh, I tell the client, run for the hills. Just don't sign this. Because the fact that they would give you this contract at all shows me that they're really trying to get, take advantage of you. So, yeah.
So what happens if you sign a contract and it's no good and you realize it's too late to backstep? Like, what are your options? Like, how do you get out of a bad contract?
a lot of people come to me with this issue, and there's really only two ways, like there's the painful way and then the less painful way. The painful way is you sue them because they violated the contract for some reason, but then you have to fund a lawsuit, and that's really expensive. But
How expensive?
I can't even. I don't do litigation, but it's tens of thousands of dollars sometimes.
Ooh.
Because you have to hire a lawyer, and then they have to draft motions, and they have to file motions and argue motions and go to court, and it's a very expensive process. And a good litigator is really worth the money for sure, but
Sure.
they're expensive. The other way, the less painful way, is to try and negotiate a termination and say, okay, well, we're going to end this contract here. Sometimes the label will want something in return. They'll say, okay, either give us a flat payment, or we're going to take a percentage of your next deal. Just give us, some of that money. If you get an advance for another deal, we want a percentage of that. So you just try and figure it out that way. Some labels are more fair about it than others. Some of the bigger labels, they'll, because ultimately too, my thinking is if the artist is really just that fed up with you, they don't want to be on your label anymore. Why do you want to keep them around, right? Like
Right.
they're not gonna make quality music. They're gonna hate you. Just let them out. But the thing is, bigger labels know that, and they say, okay, let's just do a fair termination. Just give us a little bit of something on the, just on the back end of the next project. But it's not crazy. Some of the other labels that are run by real sharks, they'll want to try and really stick the knife in and get what they can, and it turns into a real fight. So it could go either way.
It's kind of like a Taylor Swift's label owning all of her recordings.
Yeah, that's an interesting question about Taylor Swift too, because I feel where she's coming from, but at the same time, like they spent a lot of money to help get her where she is.
Yes, they did.
So it's like I'm not anti, I'm not like pro label necessarily, but I feel like
there's two sides to every story.
Right. And the way I put it too is like, it's like if I built a house, don't I want to own that house? If I paid for it to be built, it's like they funded her recordings. She could have easily gone nowhere, but she did, and she blew up and she became Taylor Swift. So there is an argument to be made on their end. It's like, well, we put a lot of money at risk, and so we're reaping the rewards, and we want to own what we pay for. I tell clients, I say, look, if you want to own your music, do not sign with a record label, because that's just, you're giving it up. Now, the best thing to do is if, let's say you get a following on your own and you fund your own recordings that you own, and then you can do a licensing deal, like a distribution deal with the label. Then you can retain ownership and you get the lion's share of the money. But then, of course, your money is at risk because you paid for the recordings. So it's really about the risk, who's taking the risk financially. Because if a label signs an artist and the album flops, they don't have to pay that money back. They're just, the label's just out all that money. And that's
so then that gives them reason to push your track, which is one of the advantages. Is if they're giving you $15,000, obviously they want to make that money back, so they're going to push the track or the album.
Right. And so, like I said, philosophically, I understand where a lot of artists are coming, like Taylor Swift. I understand you want to own your own music. I get it. But at the same time, like they're taking a financial risk in the first place by investing in you, so they're going to want to own what they're paying for, basically. Wasn't
her thing too? She wanted to re-record the stuff, own tracks.
She's going to, I believe. Now, so almost all record deals have what's called a re-recording restriction that says you will not re-record this, this track for X number of years after the expiration of our deal, basically. So, I don't know what hers says. I don't represent her, but usually it's 3 to 5 years. So let's say that, a deal ended in 2015, 5 years later, that person might be able to just re-record it and put it out. So.
Interesting. And are there any other restrictions other than like, can you use the same people? Can you use some of the similar tactics that you used? Like, are there any limitations once that expires, or is it free game?
At that point, it's already out there. There's really nothing stopping you. Unless I've never seen a perpetual re-recording restriction. Usually it's for a number of years. The producer who produced it will usually have something in his contract too that says he won't produce this track for another person for X number of years as well. So, you definitely have some restrictions. And it makes sense because they don't want another version out there competing with their version that they paid for, and then funded and tried to, paid for the marketing and everything. So, it's a fair request, ask to put in the contract, I believe.
I'm just thinking like what happens when Taylor Swift goes and re-records, let's say Love Song, if that's one of the tracks. I don't know if it is or not. Love Song, and, the average consumer, average Taylor Swift fan is not going to be able to tell the two apart, you know? So let's say the one that she re-records makes all the money and the other one kind of tanks and doesn't, you know, like it blows up on YouTube, and the other one tanks. The one she recorded, I think it was Big Machine or whatever label it was at the time. What happens there? Like, is it still free game? Like there's nothing the label can do?
I mean, not really. I mean, as long as she's paying for those mechanical royalties. I mean, she wrote it herself, but you know, it's like there's as long as she's not violating a re-recording restriction. I mean, I don't know what they could really do to stop that.
Interesting.
You know, and I guess, you know, the issue, I haven't really seen that happen either, because I've never really heard of too many artists going and re-recording their catalog later.
Right.
You know,
they want to write new stuff.
Right, it doesn't really happen, so it's going to be interesting to see. I don't know. I mean, it's a fascinating thing. I know that, for example, there's this DJ named Kygo who did this.
I love Kygo.
Yeah, he's great, right? And he did that Tina Turner song. He redid, you know, "What's Love Got to Do with It," and it's her singing it over basically. And just of course, because I know with the Whitney Houston song, he got the original vocals for her track when he remixed that one, but this one he had her re-sing it, so he probably didn't have to go and do a deal with Whitney's record label, because you know she's deceased, and whereas he could say, "Oh, come in, Tina Turner, and re-sing this for me," so obviously she was able to do that. Yeah, but that's a different, but that was like a remix. It's not like she was recreating the track exactly the way it was. So,
So I think he did one with Donna Summers too.
Oh yeah, the Hot Stuff. Yeah.
Hot Stuff. Yes, that was the most recent one. Yeah, I'm a huge Kygo fan. I've been a big fan of his for 6-7 years.
He's got good stuff. Good stuff.
He does. He's got like the tropical house. It's kind of vibey stuff. It's really like really kind of chill, interesting. And now that he's taking kind of like these old like soul disco tracks and like modernizing them with a real kind of electronic sound, it's super cool.
It's smart. It's really smart. Yeah.
It's genius, tacking a big name. Plus, now that he can put, you know, featuring Tina Turner, now people can click through on Spotify all of Tina Turner's music. You know, they can click through who's Kygo and like filtering away through that. That's kind of interesting too.
Right.
So how does it work with remixing? Like how does somebody go ahead and get the rights to remix a song?
So usually what happens is, you know, the record label will just hire a remixer because they want a dance version or something, and say, "Oh yeah, we've got this new record. We want to kind of, you know, get a dance version." And they'll hire somebody. In that case, usually it's just a flat fee generally, because they're not writing a new composition. They're kind of redoing it, but it's not a new composition necessarily. And it's usually just a flat producer's fee, generally speaking, with maybe some back-end royalties if they're big enough. But, you know, it really depends.
And who owns the master? Will the label still own the master for that?
Yep, always a label.
Interesting. And same with the songwriting, same with the composition fees?
Yeah, so with the composition, what's going to happen is it's like another mechanical. So, you know, it depends. Now, the thing is, if they really redo the composition in a way, like really chop it up and do something different, it might be a new composition at that point. So then you have to kind of, you know, say, okay, well, does a remixer deserve some, you know, portion of that? Generally, no. But there's some like remixers, like I know, like Timbaland, you know, he took he would take something and remix it, but his remix was like a brand new song sometimes. Yeah. And they called it a remix, but it was a brand new song. So, you know, in that case, of course, it seems pretty much like a new work. So it really depends on how much you're changing and what you're doing.
So what dictates, like, where's the line for a new composition versus the same? And
I mean, that's, you know, case by case basis, honestly. It's really hard to tell. I mean, you know, if you're just basically taking the original vocals and building some new beat underneath it, I mean, that's not really changing the composition, because you can't copyright a drum beat, you can't copyright a chord progression. But if, like I said, if you're rearranging things and changing things, then, you know, it might, you know, you might have a better case for it. Like, okay, well, it's a new composition at that point. But or if they have somebody come in and write a new verse or something, redo a verse, bring in like a rapper or something to do, you know, that kind of changes it a little bit.
Interesting. Cool. Yeah, great. So as we kind of wrap things up here, tell us about your book, because is this the first book you've ever written?
Yes.
Congrats.
Thank you.
Amazing. I'm always looking for new books to read in the music business. Everybody's got a different take on it. So tell us about the book. Why did you write it? What's in it? How many pages is it? Is there lots of pictures?
So it's called 6 Questions About the Music Biz. It's No, sorry, no, that's my podcast. I'm starting. My bad. It's called A Straightforward Guide to the Music Biz.
I was like, I don't remember that. I don't
Sorry.
think that's right.
No, they're related, but they're different. Sorry.
Sure.
The Straightforward Guide to the Music Biz. An entertainment lawyer breaks down the industry. Basically, I as I mentioned earlier, I spend a lot of time talking to my clients, explaining the law to them, and at this point, it's like second nature. And I said, you know what? There's a need out there for this because, and that's why it's only it's less than 100 pages. It's a short book. You can read it in less than a day. I feel like there's a lot of great books out there. Like, for example, Donald Passman's book is awesome. I mean, I read that book in college. That was one of our textbooks, but it's a little bit long. I mean, it's about 500 pages. And, I could see where it'd be a little bit daunting. Mine is meant to be just sort of like a quick read. And I think that's what I was aiming for. Something a little bit more, for the 18-year-old kid who's just trying to figure, it out, doesn't want to become an expert, but just wants to know what's going on.
Sure.
So it's written in a very straightforward way. The feedback so far has been really good. I think that, hopefully it'll catch on and people will get some knowledge out of it. Ultimately, like I said, this is the manager side of me. I like to empower the artists. I feel like the more artists know, the better for them and better deals they'll get. And that's why I wrote it. I think there was just, I saw a need out there for it.
I have Donald Passman's book. I bought it when the second edition came, not second edition, 10th edition came out. I'm thinking of a different book. The 10th edition came out. And I'm on, I think, like chapter 8, and I haven't read it in like 6 or 8 months. I just haven't had the time. And it is so much. It is so, it's you almost need a law degree to understand it. There's a lot of information in there, but I find myself having to go back and reread paragraphs because he's breaking down like this different types of agreements and what's in them, and then like the types of calculations that are being made, and royalty calculations, and like all the stuff that's being made. It's like this. It's not something that you can just read once through and be like, okay, I got it. I'm ready to I can be an attorney now. There's so much substance to it. So finding somebody who can break this stuff down and like turn it into layman's term for somebody who's not an attorney, which is damn near every musician on the planet, and be able to break this down and be like, okay, this is what this means. This is what that means. Don't do this. Don't sign this. Do this type of thing. And that's super helpful. And like Donald Passman's book is great, but it's on another level. And like, I think it's more for the advanced person, like somebody who's been in the industry for 3-4 years and maybe has gone through school and has at least a 102 to maybe 201 level understanding. But yeah, there's just so much substance to it. So where can people find your book?
So the paperback is out right now on Amazon. The ebook is actually out on the 16th of November. It'll be available Kindle, Apple, iBooks, Kobo, just all the major outlets. And I definitely priced it very competitive. I mean, the paperback's $14.99. The ebook is $9.99. I want a lot of people to buy it because I think it's knowledge for them to have. I didn't want it to be prohibitively expensive. I think that, it's just, I don't think knowledge should be prohibitively expensive anyway. And like you said, I definitely have a ton of respect for Donald Passman. I have
Absolutely.
no diss against him or at all in any way. But like I said, mine is a little bit more for the beginner, someone who's just really starting out. I feel like a 17-year-old kid could pick it up and read it and understand it, well enough. And that's what I was going for. And I think too, like I said, a lot of my clients, it was kind of, the editing process was me just explaining all this stuff to my clients over and over and over again. And I got it down to sort of like a science, like, oh, you want to know about this? Here you go. And I give them like a 5-sentence explanation. So it's definitely kind of, I wrote it very quickly for that reason, because I just talked about these topics just so many times over and over. So I think when you read it, there's a real conversational nature to it. I crack a lot of jokes in it. It's very like, it feels like you're just talking to your buddy who's just explaining stuff to you. That's the way I wanted it to come across. Amazing.
And is there going to be like an audiobook?
Don't know yet. If it does well, then, maybe.
Maybe. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. I know a lot of people ask for those, and a lot of people are getting into those. Like when Audible, I see so many. This video is sponsored by Audible. Right. On YouTube. So apparently it's a big thing, and people are listening to audiobooks on their commutes to work and whatnot. So how can people keep up with you and reach out to you if they have any questions on anything, or maybe they want to hire you? How can they reach out to you?
So I have an author website. It's kamalandrew.com. That's KAMAL ANDREW. That's my middle name. KamalAndrew.com. So I have information about the books there. That's where I'm launching a podcast where I have guests. It's called 6 Questions About the Music Biz, where I just have clients of mine and just friends who I'm just going to ask questions about the music business, and they can share their experiences. For my legal website, they can go to my name at kamalmoo.com, KamalMoo.com. That'll redirect to my partner and the old website I had with my partner, but you can contact me through there. And I definitely, I'm on Instagram and all that, and you can just look me up that way, just looking at my name on Google. But I think I'm very accessible. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out. Don't be shy. I definitely like to help people when I can.
Sure. Great. And I'll put a lot of the links in the show notes below as well, so people can easily reach out and contact you if they have any questions. Cool. So thanks again for being on the show. This was so great. I learned a lot. Great to connect as well. Always looking to connect with industry professionals. So thanks again for being on the show. This was super great. And hopefully we'll meet in person sometime. I know we're both in LA, so hopefully we'll meet.
Yeah, hopefully
sometime.
Next year when the
craziness
comes out, we can all all meet up again. Yeah,
for sure.
Great.
I
appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. And hopefully your listeners will get something out of it and check out the book, and just try to be a service.
Definitely. Well, thanks again, Kamal. Have a good rest of the week and stay safe out there.
Thanks, you too. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.